At independence in 1960, Nigeria's economy was predominantly agrarian, with agriculture serving as the main source of foreign exchange, even though oil had been discovered in the 1950s. The 60s and 70s saw efforts to increase food production through policies like the National Accelerated Food Production Program (NAFPP) and Operation Feed the Nation (OFN), but poor implementation and structural inefficiencies hampered progress. The oil boom of the 1970s transformed Nigeria into an oil-dependent economy, with oil revenues accounting for over 80% of government income. While this led to increased government spending on infrastructure, it also caused the neglect of agriculture and other non-oil sectors. The resulting over-reliance on oil made Nigeria vulnerable to global oil price fluctuations. In the early 80s, oil price collapse triggered an economic downturn. To address this, the Structural Adjustment Program (SAP) was introduced in 1986, focusing on market-oriented reforms such as deregulating prices and encouraging exports. However, while SAP stabilized certain aspects of the economy, it led to inflation, reduced social spending, and increased poverty, especially in rural areas.
Nigeria has never been short of policies, from independence. Each successive government have always been coming up with policies that is aimed at the economic development of the country. But what I would say is lacking is the willpower to see through some of these policies. Nigeria at independence was a mono economy, with agriculture being the mainstay of the economy. But the discovery of crude oil, petroleum, changed the economic milieu, and of course, in the immediate post-independence period, attempt was made to really exploit these natural resources, and in trying to exploit these resources, efforts were not made to diversify the economy. You see, what most countries of the world that are developed today will do is that when they exploit or try to take advantage of a natural resources, what they do is that they diversify into other sectors of the economy, develop that sector so that it can foster an holistic economic development. What has been lacking is that when we see a natural resources that can be exploited, what we do is that we go all out, exploit it, and until the whole thing is finished, then we start looking for what next to harness and exploit, and that has really been the problem. Of course, you will discover that from independence to date, there has been an attempt to industrialize. Of course, you will know of the national economic plans, the first, second, third, and all of that. But what has been the problem is that corruption, lack of willpower, we don't see policy through, and this has always been the problem. So it is not for us to start looking for policies again. It is for us to sit down and have a rethink and rejig some of the economic policies that we have already introduced, that already have already on ground. Let us see how we can fine-tune them and make them work. I think that is what we should be thinking as we clock 64 as a nation.
Policies such as the Indigenization and Counter-Trade Act in the 1970s and 1980s were crucial milestones. However, Nigeria's inability to industrialize during this period remains a key issue. What were the consequences of missing that industrialization window, and how has that affected long-term economic development? This is an area worth exploring further, especially given its lasting impact on Nigeria's growth trajectory.
Purpose for the introduction of the indigenization policy, of course, indigenization policy is simply meant to bring the control of industries back to Nigerians. What was discovered at that time was that many companies, many industries that were then in Nigeria were controlled by expatriates. And you see, what that meant is that when they make this profit, they transfer this profit back to their homeland, so thereby impoverishing the Nigerian economy. So the government came up with the indigenization policy so that Nigerians can take certain percentages in the ownership of those industries, and that was to enhance capital retention in Nigeria rather than encouraging capital flight, And to some extent, that worked. But the issue that confronted that policy was that the Nigerians that were brought into those businesses, into those control of those industries, had no idea of how industry should be run. So at the end of the day, what happened was that those industries went comatose. Those industries, collapsed. And that is where we are. For the counter-trade policy was actually introduced by Muhammadu Buhari, when he was the military head of state. And it was because of the economic pressure that Nigeria had at that time. Nigeria was not liquid. There was no cash that could be used to pay for anything that was needed in terms of imports in the country. So they came up with the idea of a good for good. It's just like trade by barter. Good for commodity, good for good kind of arrangement. And that was just simply was put in place to help the country, the government, to secure all that it needed at that time. But then that did not work because the next government that came actually introduced structural adjustment policy, which wasn't the economic situation in the country at that time.
There's corruption everywhere, and even in high places. Government has not done anything about it, and this is infringing or scaring away investors and those who would like to be part of this economy. Don't forget that the private sector should be the engine room to propel the economy. Banditry, corruption, unemployment, and intolerance generally is a call of the day, but government should be able to put more action on tackling these issues.
Efforts to diversify the economy have been ongoing with significant reforms in agriculture, telecommunications, and banking. The National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy (NEED), launched in the early 2000s, aimed to reduce Nigeria's dependency on oil by promoting liberalization and privatization. The telecom sector in particular became a major growth driver, while agriculture has seen steady, though challenging growth due to limited mechanization and infrastructure.
I think the major problem that has faced Nigeria economically is the fact that we came to have a federal system of government that was changed into some kind of unitarianism, all right, a unitary system. That was the short-sightedness of the military rulers that we have had. You see, in the old regions, when we had the Western region, Eastern region, and Northern region, you see, the kind of system we practiced at that time was a practical federalism in which the regions took control of the resources at their disposal and only gave back a certain percentage to the federal government. But in 1966, when we had a revert to unitary system of government, what that meant was that all the economic resources, all the economic control was ceded to the federal government. So what that developed for Nigeria was a kind of water bottle kind of federalism in which all the states would sit down and wait for the month end for them to go to Abuja and share out monies from the federation account. What we should do if we want to really put Nigeria back on track economically is to go back to those days where states will be given the latitude, the freedom to exploit the resources in their states, and they will now be able to give the government the federal government certain percentage, and they will be in charge. This will bring all the governors and all the rulers at the state level back to make them to wear their thinking caps. The kind of system we have in which a governor will just be waiting for the month to come to an end, for them to go to Abuja and share from the federation account, I don't think that is the kind of the kind of political situation or economic arrangements that we should have. I think we should have a rethink as far as that system is concerned.
The 2017 Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, ERGP, focused on diversifying the economy with an emphasis on agriculture, manufacturing, and solid minerals. By 2021, the economy saw a GDP growth of 3.6%, driven by non-oil sectors such as agriculture and services, signaling some recovery. However, despite this progress, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic had caused a recession, and challenges remain in fully stabilizing the economy.
We are seeing impressive results in the area of mining, in the area of non-oil exports, non-oil activities. Jakuta's iron and steel is coming in. As agriculture is being given some boosts, both locally and internationally. Tourism is also there. I think we'll depend less on oil as time goes on. Government is putting into motion the infrastructure and the will to drive the economy forward. So I think other sectors, apart from oil, will boom, and hopefully.
Despite these efforts, Nigeria still faces major economic challenges, including high unemployment, low human capital development, and heavy reliance on oil revenues. Recent reforms under President Bola Tinubu aims to address these issues. Notable measures include the removal of fuel subsidy, the unification of exchange rates, and the promotion of the compressed natural gas (CNG) initiative. These reforms seek to reduce fiscal pressure and encourage investment, but have also led to inflation and increased living costs in the short term.
I think the government meant well. If you look at the campaign agenda of all the presidential candidates in the last election, all of them came up with the idea of that they were going to cancel subsidy and all of that. But what I think is that the government was too proactive. I mean, could have settled down to really look at the numbers, look at the figures, and I mean, give Nigerians, timelines for them to adjust. The abrupt way in which the government or the Mr. President announced that subsidy removal was the only problem I have. But you see, where we are is that we are still in the period of pains. I believe that we will get out of that and begin to enjoy these the dividends of the painful period that we are currently passing through. CNG program definitely is a welcome development, but it's going to take a lot of time for that to really take foot. Nigeria is still an economy that will, for the foreseeable future, will continue to depend on petroleum products. What we should be doing while trying to see how we can exploit the CNG option is to continue to look for avenue to make the prices of this very, very important product for Nigerians to come down. It is in that situation that we can really find the rest of mind for us to exploit that option very well. If you ask me, we should not jettison petroleum for now.
Everything boils down to leadership. Everything boils down to leadership and the need for government to be honest, to be accountable, and not use propaganda to sell itself. Government cannot be self-anointing or self-opinionated. Government must be able to tolerate opposition. And I think that has not happened. Government has been very repressive on the media, which is, the media has to check the society, check everybody, but this government has been tolerant of the media, commenting on issues and putting forward their views.
While recent reforms have shown promise, their long-term success depends on addressing deep-rooted issues such as corruption, policy inconsistency, and inadequate infrastructure. As Nigeria reflects on over 6 decades of independence, these challenges serve as a reminder that true economic progress will require sustainable effort to overcome structural barriers and create a more resilient, diversified economy for future generations. Grace Komalafe, Souq News Television.